The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor cast harsh shadows on Lisa Thompson's face as she gripped her sister Emily's hand. The doctor's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Stage 3, lymphoma. The treatment would cost $300,000, and their insurance would only cover a fraction of it. Lisa's modest salary as a high school teacher wouldn't even begin to scratch the surface. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. Emily, just 22 and in her final year of college, sat quietly on the examination table, her usually vibrant face pale and drawn. "We'll figure something out," Lisa promised, though her mind was already racing through their limited options. Their parents had died 3 years ago in a car accident, leaving Lisa as Emily's sole guardian and support system. Back in their small apartment that evening, Lisa spread out their financial documents across the kitchen table. Her savings account showed $12,000, everything she had managed to put aside over the past 5 years. The second mortgage on their parents' old house had already been used to pay for Emily's college tuition. Credit card statements revealed maxed out limits. Every column of numbers told the same story. They were completely out of options. Emily's cough from the next room made Lisa's heart clench. She opened her laptop and began searching desperately for solutions. That's when she saw the advertisement. Surrogacy for elite families. Compensation up to $500,000. The amount made her pause. It was more than enough for Emily's treatment and follow-up care. 3 days later, Lisa sat in the sterile conference room of Kane Enterprises, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The door opened precisely at 9 a.m., and Alexander Kane strode in. His reputation preceded him. The 38-year-old billionaire was known for his ruthless business practices and cold demeanor. In person, he was even more intimidating. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, with sharp features and penetrating gray eyes that seemed to assess her worth in seconds. "Miss Thompson," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I've reviewed your application. Your genetic history is acceptable, and your health screening results are satisfactory." He slid a thick contract across the table. "The terms are non-negotiable. You will carry my child for 9 months under strict medical supervision. Your diet, exercise, and daily activities will be monitored. You will move to an apartment of my choosing for the duration of the pregnancy. In return, you will receive $500,000 paid in installments." Lisa forced herself to maintain eye contact, though her throat felt dry. "I understand, Mr. Kane. Do you?" His tone was skeptical. "This is not a romantic arrangement, Miss Thompson. This is a business transaction. I expect absolute compliance with all terms." 2 weeks later, Lisa sat in Dr. Martinez's office for her first fertility treatment. The doctor explained the procedure while Lisa nodded mechanically. Her mind divided between Emily's first chemotherapy session, scheduled for the following week, and Alexander Kane's cold eyes, watching from the corner of the room. The procedure was quick but uncomfortable. Alexander remained silent throughout, checking his phone periodically. Only when Dr. Martinez announced the successful implantation did he look up, his expression unreadable. "Remember," he said as they left the clinic, "you have my personal number for emergencies only. Otherwise, communicate through my assistant. The new apartment will be ready tomorrow. I expect you to be moved in by evening." Lisa watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into a waiting black SUV. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, wondering what she had gotten herself into. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, carrying a stranger's child while her sister fought for her life. The irony wasn't lost on her. One life beginning while another hung in the balance. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "How did it go?" Lisa stared at the message, composing herself before responding. She couldn't let her sister sense her anxiety. Emily needed to focus on her recovery, not worry about Lisa's emotional state. But as she stood there on the sidewalk, caught between her sister's needs and the demanding new presence in her life, Lisa felt more alone than ever. Lisa stared at the detailed meal plan pinned to her new refrigerator. Every calorie was precisely calculated, every ingredient specifically chosen. The apartment Alexander had selected was modern and spacious, but it felt more like a medical facility than a home. Her phone buzzed with a daily reminder from Alexander's assistant. Breakfast, 7:30 a.m., organic steel-cut oatmeal, fresh berries, prenatal vitamins. She followed the instructions mechanically, measuring portions with the provided scale. The kitchen was stocked weekly by a service she never saw. Organic everything, no processed foods, no caffeine. Her former morning coffee ritual felt like a distant memory. As she ate, she scrolled through the day's schedule. Morning yoga, afternoon walk, rest period, nutritionist consultation. The sound of the apartment's intercom startled her. "Miss Thompson, your prenatal yoga instructor is here," the building's concierge announced. Lisa sighed, changing into the approved maternity workout clothes. Even her exercise routine was monitored through a fitness tracker that reported directly to Alexander's medical team. During her mandatory afternoon walk in the nearby park, Lisa spotted Alexander entering the building's private entrance. She hadn't seen him since the implantation 3 weeks ago. He looked tired, his usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. Their eyes met briefly before he disappeared inside, but that glimpse sparked her curiosity. Later that evening, an unexpected knock at her door revealed Alexander himself, not his usual assistant. "Miss Thompson," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "The medical report shows your stress levels are higher than acceptable. Explain." Lisa fought back her irritation at his demanding tone. "I'm following every rule, Mr. Kane, but my sister started chemotherapy this week, and I'm worried about her." Something flickered across his face, so brief she almost missed it. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "I lost my mother to cancer," he said quietly, the words seemingly surprising even him. "Pancreatic, stage 4 by the time they caught it." The admission hung in the air between them. Lisa waited, sensing there was more, but Alexander quickly reverted to his businesslike demeanor. "I'll have Dr. Martinez adjust your supplements to help with stress management." "Good evening, Miss Thompson." He turned to leave, but Lisa found herself speaking up. "Would you like some tea?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "It's herbal, approved by your nutritionist." Alexander paused, his hand on the doorknob. After a long moment, he gave a short nod. Lisa busied herself in the kitchen, acutely aware of his presence as he sat stiffly at her dining table. The silence stretched between them until she placed a cup before him. "How old were you?" she asked carefully. "When your mother passed." 15, he replied, his fingers tracing the rim of the cup. "My father, he couldn't handle it. Left shortly after. I was raised by boarding schools and family lawyers." His tone was matter-of-fact, but Lisa caught the underlying pain. "I'm sorry," she said simply, understanding better now his need for control, his distance. "It was a long time ago." He stood abruptly, leaving the tea untouched. "The new supplements will be delivered tomorrow. Good night, Miss Thompson." 2 weeks later, Alexander unexpectedly joined her for dinner. His assistant cited something about monitoring her nutrition personally, but Lisa suspected there was more to it. He arrived with takeout from an approved restaurant, a surprising deviation from her usual meal plan. They ate in what started as awkward silence, but gradually evolved into careful conversation. Alexander asked about Emily's treatment, showing unexpected knowledge of cancer protocols. Lisa found herself sharing stories about her sister, and to her surprise, Alexander occasionally offered brief glimpses into his own past. The way he listened intently, his usual cold facade slightly softened in the warm evening light, made Lisa's heart beat faster. She caught herself studying his profile as he spoke about his latest business project, noticing how his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he made a rare wry observation. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was attracted to him. The thought was terrifying. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, nothing more. She was carrying his child for money to save her sister, not to develop feelings for a man who viewed everything, including this pregnancy, as a transaction. When their hands accidentally brushed as they both reached for the water pitcher, the brief contact sent electricity through her body. Alexander pulled back as if burned, his mask of professional detachment instantly back in place. He made his excuses and left shortly after, leaving Lisa alone with her confused emotions and the lingering warmth where their hands had touched. Later that night, as Lisa lay in bed, her hand rested on her slightly rounded belly. His baby moved for the first time, a subtle flutter that brought tears to her eyes. How had everything become so complicated? She was supposed to remain detached, treat this as the business arrangement it was. Instead, she found herself wondering what Alexander had been like as a child. If this baby would have his eyes, his determined expression. She rolled over, punching her pillow in frustration. She couldn't afford these feelings, not with Emily's life hanging in the balance, not with Alexander's clear boundaries and emotional walls, not with everything at stake. But as sleep finally claimed her, her dreams were filled with the slight softening of his expression when he talked about his mother, the careful way he listened when she spoke, and the unmistakable attraction she'd felt across her dining room table. Lisa sat in Emily's hospital room, watching her sister sleep through another round of chemotherapy. The sight of Emily's thin frame and pale skin twisted something in her chest. At 4 months pregnant, Lisa's own body was changing rapidly, a stark contrast to her sister's declining health. "You seem distracted," Emily said weakly, opening her eyes. "Is everything okay with the baby?" Lisa forced a smile, adjusting Emily's blanket to avoid her sister's perceptive gaze. How could she explain that while the baby was fine, she was falling apart inside? That every time Alexander Kane entered a room, her heart raced. That she lay awake at night thinking about their dinner conversations, analyzing every slight change in his expression, every careful word. "The baby's perfect," Lisa answered, resting a hand on her growing belly. "Just tired." "And Mr. Kane," Emily pressed, always too observant for her own good. "You mention him differently now." Before Lisa could respond, her phone buzzed. Alexander's private number. Her heart jumped as she answered. "Miss Thompson." His voice was tense. "The monitoring system shows elevated blood pressure readings. I've scheduled an immediate appointment with Dr. Martinez." 20 minutes later, Lisa sat in the familiar examination room, Alexander pacing nearby, while Dr. Martinez conducted tests. The doctor's frown deepened as she reviewed the results. "The blood pressure is concerning," Dr. Martinez said. "There are also signs of early stress-related complications. Miss Thompson needs complete rest for at least a week. No hospital visits, no excess movement." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I'll arrange for a private nurse to monitor her sister." "That's not necessary," Lisa protested. "I can't just abandon Emily." "This isn't a negotiation," Alexander snapped, his worry manifesting as anger. "The contract clearly states." "The contract?" Lisa stood up, emotions finally boiling over. "Is that all you think about? Your precious contract? There's a real person involved here, my sister. And this baby isn't just a business transaction." The room fell silent. Dr. Martinez quietly excused herself, leaving them alone with the tension crackling between them. "You think I don't know that?" Alexander's voice was dangerously low. "You think I don't lie awake wondering about this child?" About he cut himself off, running a hand through his usually perfect hair. "About what?" Lisa pressed, stepping closer. "About the fact that something's changed. That this isn't just business anymore." "Nothing's changed," he said harshly, but his eyes betrayed him, dropping to her lips before quickly looking away. "Nothing can change. The contracts stop hiding behind the contract." Lisa's voice cracked. "I see how you look at me when you think I'm not watching. I feel how you respond when we're close. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you feel nothing." Alexander moved suddenly, closing the distance between them. For a heart-stopping moment, Lisa thought he might kiss her. Instead, He gripped the examination table behind her, caging her with his arms, but not touching her. "What I feel doesn't matter," he said, his voice rough. "This arrangement has rules for a reason. Feelings complicate things. Feelings lead to expectations, to disappointment, to—" He stopped, his breath uneven. "To what?" Lisa whispered, her heart pounding. "To loss." The words seemed torn from him. "I won't risk that. Not again. Not with you. Not with this child." The pain in his voice made Lisa reach for him, but he stepped back sharply. "You'll move to the penthouse apartment," he said, his business mask sliding back into place. "It's closer to my office. I can monitor the situation more effectively." "Alexander," Lisa tried one more time, using his first name for the first time. He flinched, as if struck. "The movers will be there tomorrow. This discussion is over, Miss Thompson." He strode to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "And Lisa," the use of her first name made her breath catch. "Please, just follow the doctor's orders." "I can't." He stopped, shook his head, and left. Lisa sank onto the examination table, her hand covering her mouth to hold back a sob. The baby kicked strongly, as if sensing her distress. How had she let this happen? How had she fallen in love with a man who was so determined to keep her at arm's length? Her phone buzzed again, Emily asking where she was. Lisa stared at the message, feeling torn between the two people she loved most in the world. Her sister, fighting for her life, and Alexander, fighting against his own heart. And in the middle, growing stronger every day, was the baby that connected them all. Dr. Martinez returned, prescribing bed rest and additional medications. But as Lisa left the clinic, she knew no medicine could cure what was really wrong. She had fallen hopelessly in love with a man who was terrified of love itself. Lisa first noticed the sleek black car during her weekly prenatal checkup. It appeared again outside her new penthouse building, and once more near Emily's hospital. By the third sighting, she knew it wasn't coincidence. The woman behind the wheel, elegant, older, with perfectly styled silver hair, watched her with calculated interest. The mystery unraveled during a charity gala. Alexander insisted she attend, claiming it would ease investor concerns about his sudden interest in a surrogate pregnancy. Lisa stood uncomfortably in a designer maternity gown when the silver-haired woman approached. "So this is Alexander's latest project," the woman said, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes sharp. "I'm Vivian Sterling. Alexander and I go way back." The name hit Lisa like a physical blow. She'd seen it in newspaper articles during her research into Alexander, his former mother-in-law, the woman who'd blamed him publicly for her daughter's death 5 years ago. "Lovely to meet you," Lisa managed, trying to step away, but Vivian's grip on her arm was surprisingly strong. "He hasn't told you about Rebecca, has he?" Vivian's perfectly manicured nails dug slightly into Lisa's skin. "My daughter, his wife, the one that's enough, Vivian." Alexander's voice cut through the conversation like ice. He appeared beside Lisa, his face a mask of controlled anger. "This is neither the time nor place. It's never the time with you, is it, Alexander?" Vivian's smile remained pleasant, but her eyes flashed. "Does your surrogate know what really happened? Does she know why Lisa? The car is waiting," Alexander interrupted, leading her away with a hand on the small of her back. His touch, usually so careful and rare, now felt possessive, protective. In the car, Lisa waited for explanations that didn't come. Alexander stared out the window, his jaw clenched. "Your wife," she finally said quietly. "Rebecca, what happened to her? It's not relevant to our arrangement." His voice was cold, distant. "Vivian clearly thinks it is." Lisa turned to face him. "She's following me, Alexander. I deserve to know why." He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Rebecca died 5 years ago," he finally said, each word measured. "Vivian blames me. That's all you need to know." But it wasn't all, and Lisa knew it. Over the next week, Vivian seemed to appear everywhere. At Lisa's favorite cafe, at her prenatal yoga studio, even outside Emily's hospital room. "He's not what you think," Vivian said during one such chance meeting. "The caring for Kade, the protective gestures, it's all an act. Ask him about the night Rebecca died. Ask him why he wasn't there when she needed him most." The words haunted Lisa. She found herself watching Alexander more closely, noting how he flinched at certain topics, how his eyes sometimes held a shadow of old pain. During their now regular shared dinners, she caught him studying her with an expression that looked almost like guilt. Unable to resist, Lisa began researching Rebecca Kane's death. The official reports were vague: a car accident on a rainy night. But Vivian's public accusations hinted at something darker: negligence, abandonment, a marriage falling apart. "You're distracted," Alexander observed one evening, as Lisa pushed food around her plate. "Is it Emily?" Emily's treatment was progressing slowly but steadily. That wasn't what kept Lisa awake at night anymore. "Tell me about Rebecca," she said suddenly, watching his face shut down. "Please." Vivian keeps saying. "Vivian needs to stay out of this." His voice was sharp. "Whatever she's told you, she hasn't told me anything concrete," Lisa interrupted. "That's the problem. I'm carrying your child, Alexander. I'm involved in your life, whether you like it or not. Don't I deserve the truth?" Alexander stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The city lights cast shadows across his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw. "The truth," he said bitterly, "is that some things are better left in the past. Not when they're affecting the present." Lisa moved to stand behind him. "Not when they're making you push away anyone who might care about you." He turned suddenly, his eyes intense. "Is that what you do, Lisa? Care about me?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Lisa felt her heart race as she met his gaze. "You know I do," she whispered. Alexander reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, but not quite touching. "Then trust me when I say this. Knowing the full story will only hurt you. And I've hurt enough people in my life." He left shortly after, leaving Lisa with more questions than answers. That night, she received a text from an unknown number: "Vivian." Attached was a photo of an old newspaper clipping: "Tech mogul's wife dies alone, while husband attends business meeting." Lisa stared at her phone, feeling the baby move restlessly within her. She was carrying this man's child, falling deeper in love with him every day. Yet she realized she knew almost nothing about the tragedy that had shaped him. The weight of unspoken truths and hidden pain hung heavy in the air of her elegant prison of a penthouse. Tomorrow, she decided, she would visit the newspaper archives. She needed to know what happened that rainy night 5 years ago, not just for herself, but for the child who would inherit whatever legacy of pain Alexander carried. She owed them both that much. The newspaper archives were housed in a dusty basement downtown. Lisa spent hours scrolling through microfilm, her back aching, until she found what she was looking for. Not in the main articles about Rebecca's death, but in a small human interest piece published months before the accident. The article detailed the Kane family's tragic history, including a photograph that made Lisa's heart stop: Alexander, Rebecca, and a small boy with Alexander's eyes. The caption read, "Kane family mourns loss of 4-year-old son, James, to rare genetic disorder." Further digging revealed more: Rebecca's subsequent depression, her withdrawal from public life, the strain on their marriage. The final piece came from Rebecca's personal diary, preserved in a memorial article published by her mother. Lisa read the last entry with trembling hands. "Alexander buries himself in work, refusing to face our loss. He's terrified of loving again, of being vulnerable. The genetic testing showed we could never have another child without risking the same disease. He won't even discuss adoption. Tonight, I'm driving to his office. We need to talk, really talk, about our future." The diary entry was dated the night of Rebecca's fatal accident. Lisa sat back, her hand resting on her swollen belly, understanding crashing over her. Alexander's insistence on genetic testing, his obsessive monitoring of the pregnancy, his emotional distance, it all made terrible sense. When she returned to the penthouse, she found Alexander waiting. "Where were you?" His voice was tight with controlled panic. "Your tracking device was disabled." Instead of answering, Lisa placed the old article on the coffee table between them. Alexander's face went pale as he saw the photograph of his son. "You had no right," he whispered. "I had every right," Lisa countered gently. "I'm carrying your child, Alexander. A child that, according to these articles, you were told you could never safely have. Why didn't you tell me about James?" Alexander turned away, but not before Lisa saw the raw pain in his eyes. "Because talking about him makes it real," he said, his voice rough. "Because every time I think about him, I remember holding him in that hospital room, watching him slip away, powerless to help him." "And Rebecca," Lisa prompted softly. "She was driving to see you the night she died. She wanted to try again." The words seemed torn from him. "She was willing to risk having another child, knowing the chances. I couldn't. I couldn't watch another child die. We fought. She left." The roads were wet. His voice broke. Lisa moved closer, placing a hand on his arm. This time, he didn't pull away. "The genetic testing we did," she said carefully. "It wasn't just routine, was it?" Alexander shook his head. "I had them checked specifically for James's condition. When it came back negative, he swallowed hard. "I allowed myself to hope. But hope is dangerous, Lisa. Hope leads to attachment, to love, to life," Lisa finished. "Alexander, shutting yourself off from love doesn't honor James's memory. It doesn't bring Rebecca back." "You don't understand," he said harshly. "I killed them both. My son died because of my faulty genes. Rebecca died because I couldn't give her what she needed. And now you," he gestured helplessly at her pregnant belly. "And now me," Lisa agreed steadily. "Carrying a healthy child. Your child. A child who deserves a father capable of love, not just protection." Alexander's hand moved unconsciously toward her stomach, stopping just short of touching. Lisa took his hand and placed it gently where the baby was kicking. His sharp intake of breath echoed in the quiet room. "James wasn't your fault," Lisa said softly. "Rebecca's accident wasn't your fault. But this baby is your chance to be the father you always wanted to be." Alexander's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I don't know how," he admitted. "I don't know how to love without fear anymore." "Then let me help you," Lisa whispered. "Let me show you." For a moment, he seemed to consider it, his walls crumbling. Then a car honked outside, making him jerk away. "I can't," he said roughly. "I can't risk it. Not again. Not with you. Not with," he gestured at her belly. "Alexander, I'll have the car take you to your sister's treatment tomorrow." He cut her off, retreating behind his business mask. "The nurse will accompany you." He left quickly, but not before Lisa saw his hands shaking. She sat heavily on the couch, surrounded by old newspaper clippings that told a story of love and loss, of a man so broken by grief he'd forgotten how to heal. The baby kicked again, strong and healthy, and Lisa made a silent promise. Somehow, she would help Alexander find his way back to love, not just for the baby's sake, or her own, but for the little boy whose memory still haunted his father's heart. The days following the revelation about James took on a strange rhythm. Alexander threw himself into work, appearing only for mandatory medical checkups where he spoke exclusively to Dr. Martinez. Yet Lisa often caught him watching her from a distance, his expression a mix of longing and fear. During one such checkup, Dr. Martinez casually mentioned, "The baby's heartbeat is strong, just like his father's." Alexander flinched visibly. "His? Yes. Would you like to know the gender?" "I assumed, since it's in the latest report," Dr. Martinez began. "A boy," Alexander cut her off, his face draining of color. He left the room abruptly, leaving Lisa staring after him. She found him an hour later in his private office, courtesy of his concerned assistant. He stood at the window, shoulders rigid, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. "I can't be his father," he said, without turning around. sensing her presence. Not really. Not the way he deserves. You're already his father, Lisa said quietly, moving to stand beside him. And you're nothing like your genes, Alexander. This baby is healthy. All the tests prove it. Tests can be wrong. His knuckles were white around the glass. James was healthy too, at first. Perfect. Until he wasn't. This is different, is it? He turned to her suddenly, his eyes fierce. Every time I look at you, every time I think about this child, I see James. I see Rebecca. I see everything I've lost. Everything I could lose again. So you'll push us away instead, Lisa challenged. Preemptively destroy any chance of happiness to avoid the possibility of pain. You don't understand what it's like, he said roughly, to hold your child while he takes his last breath, to watch your wife drive away in anger and never come back, to know it was all because of you. Then help me understand. Lisa stepped closer, taking the glass from his hand and setting it aside. Stop running. Stop hiding behind your wealth and your contracts and your rules. Be human with me, Alexander. For a moment, she thought he might. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheek in a gesture becoming familiar. The baby kicked, making her gasp softly, and Alexander's other hand moved instinctively to her belly. He's strong, Lisa whispered, covering his hand with hers. Like his father? Alexander's breath hitched. Their faces were close now, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Lisa, he breathed, more prayer than word. Then his phone rang, the special tone he used for emergency business calls. The spell broke. He stepped back, walls slamming back into place. I have a meeting, he said stiffly, straightening his tie. The nurse will check on you later. Of course you do, Lisa said bitterly. Run away. It's what you're good at. He paused at the door. I'm not running away. I'm protecting you, both of you. No, Lisa's voice cracked. You're protecting yourself, and in doing so, you're denying this child, your son, the chance to have a father who loves him openly, completely, without reservation. Love isn't enough, Alexander said quietly. I loved James. I loved Rebecca. Look how that ended. Love is everything, Lisa countered. It's what gives us the strength to face loss, to heal, to try again. I love you, Alexander. I've tried not to, but I do. And I know you feel something too, even if you're too scared to admit it. The silence that followed her confession was deafening. Alexander stood frozen, his hand on the doorknob, his back to her. Love is a luxury I can't afford, he finally said, his voice hollow. The contract will be fulfilled. You'll be compensated. The child will want for nothing. That has to be enough. He left before Lisa could respond, the soft click of the door closing feeling like a gunshot in the quiet office. She sank into his leather chair, tears finally falling freely. The baby kicked again, a strong, steady rhythm that matched her breaking heart. She caressed her swollen belly, whispering, I'm sorry, little one. I tried. I really tried to reach him. On his desk, face down, she noticed a frame she'd never seen before. Turning it over, her breath caught. It was a photograph of James, laughing in Alexander's arms. They had the same smile, the same crinkle around their eyes. The glass was worn in one corner, as if someone had touched it repeatedly over the years. Lisa replaced the photo carefully. Alexander Kane, the man who claimed he couldn't afford to love, kept his son's picture within arm's reach every day. His heart wasn't as frozen as he pretended. It was just buried under layers of guilt and fear, waiting for someone brave enough, patient enough, to help him find it again. The question was, did she have the strength to keep trying? The headlines appeared without warning. Kane Enterprises CEO in surrogacy scandal. The article, published in a major business journal, implied improper relationships, questionable contracts, and potential ethical violations. Lisa's name wasn't mentioned, but her photo, taken outside her prenatal yoga studio, featured prominently. Alexander's response was immediate and overwhelming. Security teams appeared at every entrance to the penthouse building. Lisa's social media accounts were locked down. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from reporters seeking comment. "Don't respond to anyone," Alexander ordered during a tense meeting in his office. "My PR team will handle this." "Handle what, exactly?" Lisa demanded. The truth is irrelevant. What matters is protecting the company's reputation and your privacy." He didn't look at her as he spoke, focused instead on the documentation his lawyers were preparing. "Vivian's behind this," Lisa said. "She's trying to hurt you through me." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Vivian is being handled like everything else in your life." Lisa stood, one hand supporting her 7-month pregnant belly. "Is that all this is to you? Another situation to be handled?" Before he could respond, his assistant burst in. "Sir, Vivian Sterling is giving a live interview on Channel 8. The television switched on to show Vivian, perfectly composed, speaking directly to the camera. I'm concerned about history repeating itself. Alexander Kane has a pattern of using people for his own ends, regardless of the emotional cost. My daughter learned this too late. I hope this young surrogate mother realizes what she's gotten herself into before it's too late." Alexander's phone began ringing immediately. Board members, investors, partners, all demanding explanations. Lisa watched as he transformed before her eyes, becoming the cold, calculating businessman she'd first met. "Get me the board on conference," he barked at his assistant. "And call Edwards at Channel 8. Remind him about his daughter's scholarship at Yale." He turned to Lisa. "The car will take you home. Stay there until this blows over. That's your solution." Lisa felt anger rising. "Hide me away until you can clean up this mess." "This isn't about you," he said sharply. "This is about protecting the company. The baby, the company." Lisa cut him off. "It's always about the company. Never about feelings. Never about what's real between us. There is nothing between us." Alexander's voice was cold. "That's what you need to tell anyone who asks. This is a business arrangement, nothing more." The words hit Lisa like physical blows. "You're a coward," she whispered. "You're so afraid of being hurt again that you'll destroy anything good in your life." For a moment, something flashed in his eyes. Pain, regret, maybe even love. Then his phone rang again, and the moment was gone. "The car is waiting," he said, turning away. "We'll discuss this later." "No." Lisa's voice was firm. "We won't. Because there's nothing left to discuss, is there? You've made your choice. The company wins. Fear wins. Vivian wins." She left his office with her head high, ignoring the stares of his employees. In the elevator, she finally let the tears fall. The baby kicked strongly, as if sensing her distress. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, rubbing her belly. "We'll figure this out." Back in the penthouse, Lisa made a decision. She couldn't keep living in this limbo, watching Alexander retreat further into his shell every time they got close. She wrote a letter, pouring out everything in her heart. "Alexander, I understand now why you push people away. Losing James broke something in you. Losing Rebecca convinced you that love only leads to pain. But in trying to protect yourself from hurt, you're missing out on joy, on life, on the chance to be the father this baby deserves. I love you, not the CEO, not the billionaire, but the man who keeps his son's photo on his desk. The man who checks my medical reports 3 times a day because he's terrified of history repeating itself. The man who pretends not to care while caring so deeply it terrifies him. But I can't keep loving someone who won't let himself love back. I can't keep watching you choose fear over happiness. This baby deserves better. I deserve better. I'm leaving the penthouse. I'll honor the contract, monthly checkups, all the medical requirements, but I can't stay here, watching you build walls higher every day while pretending it doesn't break my heart. When you're ready to face your fears, to choose love over safety, you know where to find me. Until then, I'll be at Emily's." Lisa, she placed the letter on his desk that evening, knowing he worked late. Then she packed a small bag and called a taxi, ignoring the security team's protests. As the taxi pulled away, she saw Alexander's car arriving. For a moment, their eyes met through the windows. She saw him reach for his phone, probably to order security to stop her. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand, watching her drive away, just as Rebecca had done 5 years ago. The difference was, Lisa wasn't running from love. She was running toward it, hoping Alexander would find the courage to follow. Lisa was organizing Emily's medications when the call came from her sister's oncologist. The latest tests showed the cancer was spreading despite the aggressive treatment. They needed to try an experimental protocol. Expensive, but promising. How much? Lisa asked, her hand instinctively moving to her 8-month pregnant belly. The number made her sink into a chair. The surrogate payment from Alexander would cover it, but only just. She'd been saving some for the baby's future, hoping to give him a start in life, independent of his father's wealth. Emily watched her from the hospital bed, too perceptive as always. It's bad news, isn't it? Before Lisa could respond, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Alexander stood there, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, his tie loose and hair unkempt. "The hospital called me," he said, his eyes fixed on Lisa. "As your emergency contact, they said there were complications with Emily's treatment." Lisa straightened, protective instincts flaring. "We're handling it." "Are you?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "Like you're handling living in this small apartment. Like you're handling the stress that Dr. Martinez says is affecting the baby." "Don't," Lisa warned. "Don't you dare use the baby to manipulate me." "I'm not." Alexander stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Can we talk privately?" Emily spoke up from her bed. "Use my room. I need to do my physical therapy anyway." She gave Lisa's hand a squeeze as she left with her nurse. Alone, the tension between them crackled. Alexander paced while Lisa sat heavily in the worn armchair, her back aching. "Come back to the penthouse," he said, finally. "Please." "Why?" "So you can control everything again. Keep me in my gilded cage while you hide behind your walls, so I can protect you." The words burst from him. "Do you know what it does to me, knowing you're here, knowing you're struggling, knowing our son?" He stopped abruptly. "Our son," Lisa repeated softly. "That's the first time you've called him that." Alexander's face softened momentarily. "I read your letter 100 times, maybe more, and you're right, about everything. About me being a coward, about choosing fear." He knelt before her chair, surprising her. "But you're wrong about one thing. I do love you." Lisa's heart stopped. "What?" "I love you," he repeated, his voice rough. "I love you so much it terrifies me. Every time I see you, every time I think about this baby, our baby, I'm paralyzed with fear of losing you both." "Alexander, let me finish," he pleaded. "When you left, I told myself it was better this way, safer, but I can't sleep. I check your medical reports obsessively. I have security watching this building 24/7. And still, I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of everything. Of loving you and losing you. Of being a father again. Of failing this child like I failed James." Lisa reached out, touching his face gently. "You didn't fail James. You loved him. Sometimes love isn't enough to keep someone with us, but that doesn't make it worthless." Alexander leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. "I don't know how to do this. How to love without fear. Nobody does," Lisa said softly. "We just choose to love anyway." The baby kicked then, strong and insistent. Without thinking, Alexander placed his hand on her belly. The wonder on his face made Lisa's heart ache. "He's so strong," he whispered. "Like his father," Lisa said. "When he's not running away." Alexander met her eyes. "I'm done running, but I need you to know, Vivian is still out there. She's determined to destroy anything good in my life. Being with me won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is." Lisa covered his hand with hers. "But you need to be sure. I won't let this child grow up with a father who's half present, always waiting for disaster. I want to be better. For him, for you." Alexander's voice was thick with emotion. I've arranged for Emily to be transferred to a private medical facility. The experimental treatment, it's already paid for. Alexander, no, yes, he said firmly. Your family, now, both of you, if you'll have me. Lisa studied his face, seeing the fear there, but also determination, love, hope. If we do this, she said carefully, no more hiding behind contracts and companies. No more running when things get hard. No more running, he agreed. But I'll need help. I'll need you to remind me sometimes, when the fear gets too much, what we're fighting for. In response, Lisa took his hand and placed it where the baby was kicking. This is what we're fighting for. Love, family, a future without fear. Alexander stood, pulling her carefully to her feet and into his arms. Come home, he whispered against her hair. Both of you. Before Lisa could respond, Emily's nurse burst in. Miss Thompson, your sisters collapsed during therapy. The moment shattered. But this time, as Lisa rushed toward Emily's room, Alexander was right beside her, his hand firmly in hers. No running, no hiding. Together, the battle wasn't over. With Emily's health, with Vivian's schemes, with Alexander's fears. But for the first time, Lisa felt hope blooming. Sometimes love wasn't enough to keep someone with you, but it was always enough to make the fight worthwhile. The envelope arrived at Emily's hospital room with no return address. Inside was a medical file, Alexander's medical file, with sections highlighted in vivid yellow. Lisa's hands trembled as she read. Terminal genetic condition, hereditary, 50% chance of manifestation by age 40. Vivian appeared in the doorway as if summoned. Now you know, she said softly. The real reason he didn't want more children after James. The real reason he keeps pushing you away. Lisa's throat felt dry. How did you get this? I have friends on the hospital board. Vivian moved into the room like a predator. Rebecca knew, at the end. That's why she was driving to his office that night. She'd found out he'd hidden his condition from her for years. He'd known the risks when they had James. Known what might happen. The words hit Lisa like physical blows. All those tests during the pregnancy, his obsession with genetic screening, they weren't just about James's condition. They were about his own. He's dying, Vivian continued, her voice almost gentle. Slowly, perhaps, but dying nonetheless. Just like his father did before him. That's the legacy he's passing on to your child. Not his wealth, but his death sentence. You're lying, Lisa whispered. But the medical documentation in her hands told a different story. Ask him yourself. Vivian smiled sadly. Oh wait, he's in Singapore, isn't he? Another convenient business trip, just when things were getting too real between you. Lisa's mind raced. Alexander had left 3 days ago, promising to return before her due date next month. He'd been different since their reconciliation, more open, more present. But still, there were moments when she caught him staring into distance. His expression haunted. Why are you doing this? Lisa demanded. Why now? Because someone needs to protect you from him. Vivian's eyes flashed. Like I failed to protect Rebecca. He'll draw you in, make you love him, then leave you to pick up the pieces when his condition worsens. He's selfish, Lisa. He always has been. You're wrong about him. Am I? Ask yourself, why didn't he tell you about his condition? Why keep it secret, even after claiming he wants to be honest with you? Because he's a coward. He takes what he wants, then runs when things get difficult. Lisa's phone buzzed. Alexander's name lighting up the screen. She stared at it, her heart pounding. Go ahead, Vivian urged. Ask him. Watch him try to explain away another lie. With shaking fingers, Lisa answered, Is it true? She asked before Alexander could speak. The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, his voice came through, tired and resigned. Vivian came to see you. Answer the question, Alexander. Are you sick? Lisa, don't Lisa me. Her voice cracked. Are you dying? Is that why you've been so afraid of commitment? Of love? Because you know you'll leave us just like your father left you. I'm on my way back, he said quietly. We should discuss this in person. No. Lisa felt tears rolling down her cheeks. I need to know now. Have you been lying to me this whole time? Not lying, he said carefully. The condition, it's complicated. The genetics are unpredictable. Some people live into their 70s. Others, like your father, he died at 42. Alexander's voice was barely audible. I'm 38. The numbers hit Lisa hard. For years, maybe less. When were you going to tell me? After the baby was born. I needed to know you both were safe first. Safe? Lisa laughed bitterly. You mean you wanted to make sure we were thoroughly attached before dropping this bomb? God, Vivian was right. You're selfish. Lisa, please. No. She cut him off. I can't process this right now. I need time. I'll be there in 10 hours, he said urgently. Just wait for me, please. Let me explain everything, like you explained about James, about Rebecca, about your condition. Each word felt like glass in her throat. How many more secrets are there, Alexander? The baby kicked sharply, making her gasp. Alexander heard it through the phone. Is everything okay? Do you need what I need? Lisa said quietly. Is space, time to think, to decide if I can trust anything you've ever told me. I love you, he said desperately. That wasn't a lie. Nothing about us was a lie, except the part where you're dying. Lisa wiped her tears. Don't rush back. I won't be there anyway. She hung up before he could respond, then turned to Vivian, who had watched the exchange with satisfaction. Thank you, Lisa said coldly, for telling me the truth. Now get out. Alone, Lisa sank into a chair, her hands cradling her belly. The baby moved restlessly, as if sensing her distress. Everything she'd believed about her future with Alexander seemed to crumble around her. A timer clicked in her head now. For years, maybe less. A death sentence hanging over their love story before it truly began. Her phone buzzed continuously. Alexander, his assistant, even his pilot, all trying to reach her. She turned it off, needing silence to think. On the table, the medical file lay open, its pages filled with technical terms and grim probabilities. But between the lines, Lisa could read another story of a man so afraid of causing pain that he'd rather push away love than risk leaving it behind. The question was, could she love him anyway, knowing their time was limited? Could she willingly walk into heartbreak, eyes wide open? The baby kicked again, strong and insistent, as if answering for her. Lisa sat in Emily's hospital room, watching her sister sleep peacefully after another successful treatment. The experimental protocol was working. A miracle, the doctors called it. Outside, dawn was breaking over the city. Her phone, finally turned back on, showed dozens of missed calls from Alexander. A soft knock at the door made her turn. Dr. Martinez stood there, looking uncomfortable. Miss Thompson, I need to speak with you about Mr. Kane's medical file. I already know everything, Lisa said tiredly, touching her 9-month pregnant belly. No, Dr. Martinez said firmly, you don't. She placed another file on the table, newer, thicker than Vivian's version. This is Alexander's complete medical history, including the latest genetic research from a specialized clinic in Switzerland. Lisa's hands shook as she opened it. The medical terminology was complex, but certain phrases jumped out. Genetic mutation, previously misdiagnosed, new treatment protocols, life expectancy normalized with proper intervention. I don't understand, Lisa whispered. The condition Alexander inherited from his father isn't necessarily terminal, Dr. Martinez explained gently. Medical science has advanced significantly in the past decade. There are treatments now, experimental ones, but promising. Alexander has been participating in clinical trials for the past year. A year, Lisa's mind raced. Since before he met me. Yes, his father died because the condition wasn't properly understood or treated. But Alexander's case is different. With continued treatment, he could live a normal lifespan. Why wouldn't he tell me this? Because the treatments aren't guaranteed. a familiar voice said from the doorway. Alexander stood there, looking exhausted from his rushed flight. Because I didn't want to give you false hope. Dr. Martinez quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. Alexander moved into the room slowly, as if afraid Lisa would run. Vivian knew about the original diagnosis, he said quietly, but she didn't know about the treatments. I've kept them private, working with specialists in Switzerland. That's where I've really been going on these business trips. Why keep it secret? Lisa demanded. Why let me believe? Because I'm terrified it won't work, he admitted, sinking into a chair. Because every time I start to hope, I remember holding James, watching him slip away. I remember Rebecca driving into that storm because I couldn't face our loss. Hope is dangerous, Lisa. Hope can destroy you. So can fear, she countered. You're so afraid of causing pain that you keep causing it anyway. Alexander leaned forward, running his hands through his disheveled hair. When I met you, I was already in the treatment program. The preliminary results were good, but not guaranteed. I told myself it was just a business arrangement. Find a surrogate, have an heir, prepare for the worst. But then what? Then I fell in love with you, he said simply. And it terrified me, because if the treatments fail, if I die young like my father, I'll be leaving you alone. Leaving our son without a father, just like James. Lisa moved closer, taking his hand. Alexander, life has no guarantees. The only certainty is this moment, right now. The baby kicked strongly, making them both smile. Alexander placed his free hand on her belly, wonder mixing with fear on his face. The latest test results are promising, he said softly. The treatments are working better than expected. But there's still a chance. There's always a chance, Lisa interrupted. Of illness, of accidents, of loss. That's not a reason not to love. It's a reason to love more fully, more completely, while we can. How can you be so brave? He whispered. Because I learned it from my sister. Lisa glanced at Emily's sleeping form. Every day, she chooses to fight, to hope, to live fully despite the odds. That's real courage. Not running from fear, but facing it. Alexander stood suddenly, pulling something from his pocket. A small velvet box. I bought this 3 months ago, he admitted. Been carrying it everywhere, waiting for the right moment, terrified there would never be one. Lisa's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a stunning engagement ring. I can't promise you forever, he said hoarsely. The treatments might work, or they might not. I might have 40 more years, or 4, but I can promise you today and tomorrow, and every day I'm given, if you'll have me. You're really ready? Lisa asked. No more running, no more hiding, no more, he promised. When I thought I'd lost you yesterday, nothing else mattered. Not the company, not Vivian's schemes, not even my fears. Just you and our son, and the life we could have together, however long it lasts. The baby kicked again, as if adding his vote. Lisa smiled through her tears. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, to today, to tomorrow, to every day we get. Alexander slipped the ring on her finger, then pulled her carefully into his arms. Over his shoulder, Lisa saw Emily watching them, smiling knowingly. Outside, the sun had fully risen, painting the city in shades of gold. Life offered no guarantees, no promises of forever. But in that moment, with Alexander's arms around her, their baby moving between them, and her sister getting stronger each day, Lisa understood. Love wasn't about certainty,